And now for the table of knowledge. Okay, big one this week,
A big one. A very juicy, interesting one too.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Elizabeth Holmes. Now, if you don't know who Elizabeth Holmes is, we will be telling you. But I've certainly enjoyed the week of researching her. I already knew a fair bit about her, and I'm sure you did too.
I did, but I did learn a lot by researching her quite a bit. There were a lot of things I didn't know.
No. All right, so just in a very brief description, what she is famous for is she set up a failed blood testing company called Theranos, and that was in sort of the 2013, I think she sort of started doing that. By 2018, it had all failed quite badly. She's been convicted of fraud, and that's why she's in our scam series, because she really has managed to scam a lot of investors out of their money. Okay, let's go back to young Elizabeth.
Exactly. So Elizabeth Holmes was born on the 3rd of February 1984, and she grew up in Washington, D.C., in America, of course.
Mm-hmm.
She was the descendant of Charles Fleischman, sorry.
Yeah. So, yeah, Charles Fleischman, he was apparently quite a rich man back in, like, quite early, like in the 1800s. He set up a company called the Fleischman Yeast Company. So the Fleischman Yeast Company was apparently made lots and lots of money, and their family should have been like billionaires and what have you anyway. And I think some of her great-grandfathers and apparently like her great-great-grandfather, whatever, some of those people had actually squandered that money away. And so as a result, they were relatively rich. They weren't poor, but they weren't the billionaires that they thought they were entitled to be.
No, exactly right. Now, Elizabeth kind of, in the interviews and articles that we've read, Jo, she kind of always wanted to be wealthy. So she was money hungry from a very young age. And I think that was kind of influenced by her parents and obviously, you know, her family and where she come from as well.
Yeah, I think so. Like there's talking about when she was a child and she was asked what she wanted to do, and she wanted to be a billionaire.
Don't we all?
But like it's kind of weird to be, you know, a 10-year-old child going, oh, I want to be a billionaire when I grow up. I mean, I think maybe this day and age that could be a little bit more likely, but I think back in the, you know, 80s that would have, or 90s, that might have just seemed a little bit obscure as an idea, but she clearly, that was what she wanted to do, and she really set her mind to it. So she was a straight A student at high school and managed to get into Stanford and decided she wanted to study chemical engineering.
Yeah, pretty intense course, of course. So while she was studying, she actually came up with an idea for a diagnosis and therapy patch. So this was her first kind of idea and invention that she was going through with. Now, her professors spoke to her about this and said that they don't think it's going to work. And she then evolved the idea to move to diagnose with a drop of blood.
Yeah.
So she actually had a fear of needles. So this is what kind of prompted this idea that when you go and get a blood test and they have to take all of those vials of blood, is there another way that we can do it with just, you know, a prick of the finger, take a drop or two, and why can't we test with that?
Yeah, so apparently she went in to do chemical engineering in the first instance for the whole purpose of because she wanted to invent something, and she figured that the best place to do that is doing chemical engineering, so that's what she did. She also then she did some apparently a course with, and I think it was with Channing Robson, who was the dean of the School of Engineering, on what's called microdosing, so like, you know, small little you know, ways of getting stuff into people, into patients. And that's where she started to come up with the idea. And her original idea, like, as we talked about, was for some sort of patch that would not only diagnose but also provide medication at the same time, which was highly ambitious. And that's where they just went, look, that's never going to work. There's no way. And not only, even if you could get it to work, people still want to have, you know, discussions with doctors to find out what's really wrong with them and have that little bit of trust with having a human element in it. So that's when she sort of switched, well, let's just try and look at the diagnosis side of it. And that's when she basically came up with this whole concept. And while a few people said to her, I don't really think that's going to work, Channing Robertson, who was her advisor and Dean of School of Engineering, he basically said, no, I think it doesn't sound like a bad idea. I think her powers of persuasion got him on board. And so she actually dropped out of Stanford in her sophomore year, which means she's in second year, because we don't have that in Australia.
No, we don't.
And she set up a company. Her original company was called Real Time Cures, and she set that up in 2003.
Yeah, exactly right. Now, she actually ended up changing the name of that company to Theranos, which is the one that we know now, and that is therapy and diagnosis combined, so Theranos. Mm-hmm. And Channing Robertson became the first board member on that company, who was the dean at the school. Now, so that all happened in 2003. By December 2004, she proceeded to raise $6 million. And 6 years later, in 2010, she had raised $92 million. So she had a lot of growth over that time.
She managed to get some very high-profile board members, including George Shultz and Henry Kissinger. So apparently her board was made up of a whole lot of ex-army generals. Like, it was very high power, who didn't necessarily have any knowledge of how, anything to do with medications and anything like that, but or medical or any of that. But they were very high-profile people. And she also had some very high-profile investors, including Rupert Murdoch, who put $125 million into her program.
Yeah, and I was actually reading that while all of this was happening, a lot of people seemed to think that her idea and her business was so legitimate because she had these high-profile names backing her. So when you see all of these names kind of attached to a business, you think, oh, well, it must be legitimate and a really good, successful business, a good idea.
She was obviously behind the scenes all was not what it seemed, but let's talk about her first of all. What an interesting person.
Yeah, a very, very interesting person. So there's reports that she idolised Steve Jobs, who of course was the founder of Apple, and Steve Jobs had a very specific appearance. If you ever seen Steve Jobs, he dressed very plain and always wore these kind of black turtleneck jumpers or sweaters. So a lot of the videos and interviews you see Elizabeth Holmes in, she had black turtleneck jumpers on with red lipstick. That was her kind of look.
That was her look. Before she went into that, though, she evidently was quite a dag. So she used to turn up, and if you have watched The Dropout, which I'm not sure if you've watched it, but I'm sure people who, if you're interested in this, you will watch this. She originally was like wearing really daggy clothes, including Christmas jumpers and stuff like that. Very, very not polished at all, probably very nerdy looking. And then, as this started to grow, it was told, she needs to have a better profile. She needs to probably look a little bit more serious about things. Started wearing those black turtlenecks, the red lipstick, blonde hair, very piercing blue eyes, which when you watch some videos, find it hard to believe that can really be, maybe it's contact lenses, maybe it's not, but they're very piercing. But what did she do to her voice?
Yeah, so she actually, her voice is just, what she did to her voice I just find so fascinating. So I actually recommend everybody just go and watch a YouTube video of her talking, because it's really hard to describe what she sounds like, what she did to her voice. But her voice, while she was doing interviews and talking, it was so low and masculine and just very serious, and it's really hard to describe.
Yeah, it is. She also hardly blinked. Like, she did blink, but she's got these really piercing eyes, and they're just wide open. Yeah, quite interesting. Like, she's definitely, and apparently now, like, people dresses her for Halloween and stuff like that. She definitely had that character appearance about her.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to describe unless you actually see a photo of her or listen to her talking.
Yeah. Now, as we said, behind the scenes, all was not what it seemed. She looked like this incredibly successful entrepreneur who started a business at 19. She had no credentials, really. She dropped out of college. She was, ambitious beyond all measures, but what was her actual credentials? Having listened to and been like reading up about her, apparently the turnover at her staff was incredibly high, because if anyone sort of questioned anything that she did, she would just essentially fire them.
Exactly right.
And then in about 2009, she brought in her partner, Ramesh Sunny Belwani, who she'd met in 2002 in Beijing when she was on a Mandarin program trip with Stanford. Now, she did speak Mandarin. Sunny was an interesting character too.
He was a very interesting character. I'd never really seen what he looked like in real life until I was researching this and seen photos of him in articles. He was not what I was picturing. I don't really know why, but he was a very, very interesting character.
Yeah. So he was 20 years older than her. He's a Pakistani immigrant who came to America. I'm not exactly sure what he did. When he met her when she was 19, I guess. He was or maybe 18 probably. He was actually married at the time to someone else. He divorced that person and they were seeing each other. Then they moved in, but people didn't really know that. So it was quite secretive, the fact that they were in a relationship. But he was, by all accounts, not the nicest person to be working with. In 2009, he joined Theranos as the COO, so the Chief Operating Officer, and proceeded to really protect Elizabeth, protect all the secrets that they were trying to keep because they weren't doing the right thing, and everyone was quite fearful of him by the sound of it. Yeah,
exactly right. So there are reports that there's any staff that kind of worked there that did have credentials and actually understood this stuff. If they ever questioned anything or said, I don't think this is working, he would get quite angry and irate, and they would get the sack essentially.
Yeah, very much so. So the machines themselves, that didn't work. So what the actual technology was meant to be, and I guess we haven't really talked about that so much, is she wanted this machine where you could get a finger prick of blood and that would be able to test for multiple different types of diseases. Obviously, I mean, in itself, it actually didn't sound like such a bad idea. It's just the fact that it's pretty much impossible to do. So with a finger prick of blood, what they were trying to do was they would put it into the machine, they would dilute the blood, because the only way to do multiple tests is essentially to dilute that blood with saline. Then they had to put different things into different parts. So within this little machine, which was probably about the size of, I don't know what you'd call it, maybe a big old Apple computer.
Yeah.
Maybe like the old Macs that used to have probably when you were at school, if they were even around back then, I don't know. Maybe a little bit bigger than that, but not huge. Maybe the size of a home printer.
Yeah.
And so they put a cartridge in that would have the drop of blood in it, and then inside that it had to do all this mixing and diluting and putting different solutions in and trying to come up with the results for the test. Obviously, test conditions need to be very, kind of perfect. So they had to make sure that the environment within that box was very stable. The technology must have just been incredibly difficult to try to get. But for years and years and hours and many engineers, they did try to make these machines, and they did actually get them working, but the results were just, not great.
Exactly right. So, while I was researching this, there was this lady who said that she had a blood test with Theranos, and it actually, I think they originally said that they could test for around 200 different
it was
things, some huge amount. And apparently her blood test came back and said that there must have been something going on, that she had a miscarriage or was going to have a miscarriage. I don't know how they test for that. And that wasn't the case at all. She ended up having a very healthy baby and whatnot. So there are a lot of reports of these people getting the results back, and they were just not correct.
But even before they started going to commercialisation, they were actually going to big pharmaceutical companies, trying to originally the idea was that these machines would be able to be put into people's houses where they could do testing of things like if they were on a medical trial or something like that, they'd be able to get their own tests done. The idea was that they'd do their test, they'd put it into the machine would feed the information back to Theranos, who would feed it to their doctor, so they could keep a track of whether the, medical tests or the trials were working well, adjust doses and all that sort of stuff. So they originally started doing that. When she first started taking the machine out to show people like Pfizer and AstraZeneca and Novartis and all those, it wouldn't work. So what they were doing was they were actually sending fake results back to the machine to make it look like it was doing what it was supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that's just crazy. Yeah. Absolutely crazy. So they were, as you said, Jo, they were getting these false records and they were producing it and convincing people that these are the results.
Yeah, so that was the first instance. Then they started, saying that they had all these big contracts with these pharmaceutical companies, none of which existed. So that would have made people go, oh, well, I better invest because this is a great product. And on the surface, it seemed amazing.
Yeah, that's right. And while all of this was happening, there was also a lot of secrecy around the product. So they weren't super, forthcoming with the information on how it actually worked. And they said, they had some information, but a lot of it was still kept quite secret. And they were saying it was because they didn't want people to take the idea and, use all of their information and create similar machines. But it was still just so secret.
And the reason it was secret was because it wasn't working. So they worked out that the pharmaceutical companies are probably not really going to be able, they were sort of seeing through it a little bit and going, I don't think it's really the right product for us. So they came up with an idea of commercialising this by putting it into a partnership with Walgreens, who is a big pharmaceutical company, big pharmacy company over there. And the other one was Safeway. So they managed to have it so that it would be in these pharmacies, so people could come up and get their blood tested with the small blood prick, get all these test results done, very cheap, very easy, and they actually went ahead with it, which is quite bizarre because they actually had no way of really testing it, because the machines weren't working right. So they managed to bluff their way through. I think they used excuses such as the fact that their technology was being used in Afghanistan and that's why they couldn't deliver the product. There was all sorts of reasons as to why they couldn't deliver the product. What they were actually doing was shipping the blood back to their laboratories, probably in San Francisco, in Palo Alto, and doing the dilution of the blood there, doing the test there, using the normal machines that people would use to do normal blood tests.
Yeah, exactly right. So it was getting very, very messy. And to have these partnerships with Walgreens and Safeway is a pretty big deal for that business. So it was a bit of a breakthrough moment for them to have these partnerships.
Yeah. So meanwhile, Elizabeth Holmes was just getting bigger and bigger. She was invited to White House dinners. She's done TED Talks. She was on the cover of Forbes magazine. She was touted as the first self-made female billionaire. And for a while she was. She got her dream of being a billionaire.
Exactly right. So she was on top of the world at the moment while all of this was happening. She had a lot of people looking up to her. And as you said, Jo, a lot of people, she was on Forbes as the first made self-billionaire. So a lot of people are going, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And none of it was really true.
No, there was even an article, or there's a video footage of her showing Joe Biden through her fake laboratory. Now, this was when he was vice president, but, it looked very impressive. There were all these Theranos machines there. It was all really... none of which worked, but it looked very impressive. And Joe Biden is saying, oh, this is this is the future of medicine and what have you. And to think that behind all of that, I think the saddest part of it is not only is she defrauding investors, that's bad, but she's actually potentially messing with people's lives, and there didn't seem to be any particular concern on that.
Yeah, I totally agree, because when you read things, it is all about the money side of things. So, all of these investors lost their money and all of this kind of stuff. But what about those people that had those false blood test results come back? And it's people's health that they're getting lied to about their health. I think that's probably a point that they just brushed over.
Yeah, it's really, really quite sad. So it all started to fall down in 2015 when an investigation started by a guy by the name of John Carreyrou. He was a Wall Street Journal journalist, which incidentally, Wall Street Journal is owned by Rupert Murdoch, so it's kind of ironic that the fall of this company came from a Rupert Murdoch company. He started to get information. So there was so much secrecy around it that people who left had, massive non-disclosure agreements, and they were actually a little bit harassed. Like it felt like when you actually listen to it, read the stories, watch the articles on it, watch the TV series on it, it's mafia stuff in some respects.
They've got the knowledge of this huge secret and fraud, essentially. So there's one employee that said that she had to move houses quite a few times, change her number multiple times, things like that. So I can imagine it really wouldn't be a very good time at all.
No, not at all. Anyway, once the article came out in 2015, pretty soon after, the Centre for Medicare and Medicaid Services in January 2016 started to investigate the laboratories, insisted on going in and actually having a look at what was going on there. And by July 2016, the laboratories had been closed down and ordered not to do anything for 2 years, which really started to be the fall and decline of the company.
Yeah, and during all of this time, Elizabeth was also standing very strong. So she was still backing the company, saying that, no, it's legitimate, everything's fine, these investigations are incorrect.
Yeah, so this went on for quite a while. The company didn't actually dissolve until September 2018, so that's like another 2 years that they still tried to hang on. They obviously reduced their staff significantly, but they were still convinced that they would actually make this work. But they finally, obviously it filed for bankruptcy in September 2018. Or to dissolve, I'm guessing it possibly wasn't bankruptcy, I'm not really sure, but it dissolved in 2018.
Yeah, exactly right. Now, in June 2018, both Elizabeth and Sonny were indicted in the US Attorney's Office of the Northern District of California. This was on 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts on conspiracy to commit wire fraud. So some pretty big charges.
Sounds a bit Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Now, both of them pleaded not guilty to these charges. So through all of this, as I said, they were still maintaining their innocence and saying, no, we haven't done anything wrong.
Now, the trial of Elizabeth Holmes actually began in August 2021, which was quite a delay. It was delayed for 2 reasons. First of all, for COVID. But secondly, because during that time she had met a new partner and fallen pregnant and had her first child.
Yeah, that's right. So she'd met her new partner, Billy Evans, and they had their first, well, she was pregnant at the time. So, and I was reading that the court systems were actually pretty pissed off. Obviously it was delayed because of COVID. That's not really anyone else's control. And I guess her getting pregnant isn't anyone else's control as well. But they were quite frustrated that this just kept getting dragged on and on and on.
Yeah. Now, she did get convicted. She was found guilty on 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, but she was not found guilty on anything to do with defrauding patients, which is interesting because to me that feels like the bigger crime than ripping money off people.
Yeah, I agree, totally. So she was actually sentenced to 11 and a quarter years in prison, so quite a little while. So she was sentenced to the federal prison camp Bryan in Texas. So it was a bit of it's a camp really.
It's a very low security.
Yeah.
Apparently one of the Real Housewives is there from Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
I don't watch that. But apparently if you are a Real Housewife, there's a person on there and she's in the same prison camp.
Yeah, so I think a lot of those kind of high profile people go to this low security camp.
And I mean, well, when I say she didn't murder anyone, she didn't murder anyone, although she probably could have if she had kept going with the fact that she was giving people the wrong diagnosis. But I guess from she's a low, I can understand why it's a low security prison.
Yeah, absolutely. So she actually started her sentence on the 30th of May this year, and she was also ordered to pay $452 million to the victims of the fraud.
Yeah, now that $452 million is meant to be shared between her and Sonny. Sonny is also in jail. I think he's actually serving a slightly longer term than she is. And she has actually had her second child. So she has 2 children to her partner, Billy Evans. The first one is the little boy called William, and the second is a little girl called Invicta. And so she's only very young. I think probably wouldn't have even been 6 months old when Elizabeth went into jail.
Oh, I think she was younger than 6 months old, yeah.
So now there is a really good New York Times interview that we've both read by Amy Chozick, I think her name is, which came out in May 2023, just before she went into prison. It's actually an interview with Elizabeth herself, which hasn't really happened for, since all this has gone down. What did you think of it?
It was a very interesting article. I don't really know. I still don't know about Elizabeth Holmes. And the article was kind of written in a way that Elizabeth Holmes is just a normal, everyday person. And
a mother.
A mother, a loving wife. She was at the zoo with her children. All of this kind of stuff. But then I watched the videos of her doing interviews, and there's something about her that's just not quite right.
Well, you don't really know what to believe, do you? And I think it talked a little bit about how, she sort of indicates that it wasn't really her fault, that she didn't really do anything wrong. I just don't understand it. And of course, that's going to be the line she takes. But it was, and I do know that it got a lot of flack when that interview came out. I felt like Amy Chozick, when she wrote it, she tried to be impartial, but I think she got a lot of flack for sounding like she was sticking to Elizabeth's side. But I guess she was just trying to tell her story.
Yeah.
But does it make us all feel sorry for her? Not at all.
No, not at all. Definitely not at all. But it was... very interesting. And as I said earlier, I actually recommend people just go and watch a quick YouTube video of her talking because it's really hard to describe Elizabeth Holmes.
I know, she's fascinating. So if you are interested in finding out more, there is a podcast called The Dropout. There's also a podcast called Blood by Judd Carreyrou. There's a Apple TV show called The Dropout, which has Amanda Seyfried playing Elizabeth Holmes. She does an amazing job.
That was very good casting.
Yeah. She has got those big bulging eyes, which is she does a great job. In fact, she does such a great job that they were going to make a movie about it with Jennifer Lawrence as playing Elizabeth, and Jennifer Lawrence said, no, I don't think I can do a better job than Amanda did.
Yeah.
So I don't think we should make the movie. So they haven't. And then, of course, there's a book by John Carreyrou called Bad Blood, which I'm actually currently reading at the moment.
Very good. You're getting right into the Elizabeth Holmes.
I am. So anyway, I don't know if there's much else to say, but it's just one of those, I just find these people, what makes them do it? What kind of crazy notions have they got in their head and self-belief to be able to be such fraudsters? I think it's that bit that I find really interesting.
Yeah, and for it to get so big, to show Joe Biden around a fake lab, at what point do you go, wow, maybe this is getting a little bit out of control here? Or you've got your machines in Walgreens. It's just getting massive.
Not realise that, or she must have known that she was just a big fraud, but to continue on with it, I just don't understand.
No, me either.
I think that's it for this week. We've talked a lot about Elizabeth.
We have.